I moved to Montana for the silence. Traded the city's endless hum for a remote cabin miles from anyone. No neighbors, no cell service. Just me and the quiet I thought I craved. For a while, it was perfect. The wind in the pines, the crackle of the fireplace, the rhythmic creak of the old floorboards, those were the only sounds. It was a symphony of solitude, and I was its sole conductor. I'd spend my days hiking, chopping wood, and my nights reading by the glow of a kerosene lamp. The world I'd left behind felt like a distant, frantic dream. I was finally unplugged, disconnected, free. The constant chatter in my own head, the relentless replays of my past mistakes, began to fade. The silence was healing me, or so I believed. It was washing away the noise, both outside and in. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years, a feeling of being truly alone and content with it. The quiet was my sanctuary. One night, the silence broke. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, staring into the dying embers of the fire. The cabin was so still you could hear a pin drop if there had been any pins to drop. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just letting my mind drift in the peaceful void. Then, a thought started to form, a memory I tried to keep buried. It was the accident, the screech of tires, the shattering glass, a flicker of an image, not even a fully formed picture yet. Before I could even complete the thought, a voice slithered through the quiet. It wasn't a sound from outside. It was close, intimate, like a whisper directly into my ear. It said, "Don't think about the accident." My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze. Every muscle in my body tensed. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't made a sound. I hadn't even finished the thought. How could anyone know? I scanned the dark corners of the room, my eyes wide with terror. The windows were black mirrors reflecting the dim firelight. There was no one there. It had to be my imagination. A trick of a tired mind, a hallucination born from too much isolation. I told myself to breathe, to calm down. It was nothing, just the silence playing tricks on me. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it away, but the voice had been so clear, so real. It wasn't my own inner monologue. It was foreign, an intruder in the sacred space of my mind. I stood up, my legs trembling, and paced the small cabin. I checked the lock on the door for the 10th time, bolted. I peered through the windows again, seeing only my own terrified reflection. I was alone. I had to be. Maybe I was finally cracking. Maybe the solitude I'd sought was too much, pushing me over the edge into madness. I tried to ground myself, focusing on the rough texture of the wooden walls, the smoky scent of the fire. I told myself it was a stress response, a phantom sound created by my own anxiety. The memory of the accident had always been a source of immense guilt and pain. Maybe my subconscious was just screaming at me to stop torturing myself. That had to be it. It was me, just a part of me I didn't recognize. I repeated this to myself like a mantra, trying to force the fear back into its box. But the feeling of being violated, of having my most private thoughts overheard, lingered like a chill in the air. Just as I started to convince myself I was overreacting, the voice spoke again. This time, it was even calmer, more matter-of-fact, which was somehow more terrifying. "You're louder than you realize." The words hung in the dead air, sharp and precise. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't angry, it was an observation. And it confirmed my worst fear. This wasn't my imagination. Something was listening. Not to my words, but to my thoughts. The very foundation of my reality crumbled in that moment. My mind, the one place that had always been truly mine, was no longer private. The silence I had traveled so far to find had become an amplifier, broadcasting my deepest secrets to an unseen audience. A wave of nausea washed over me. Who or what was this voice? Was it a ghost haunting this old cabin, a different kind of entity? Or was it something that had followed me here? The why didn't matter as much as the how. How could it hear me think? The implications were staggering. Every thought, every memory, every flicker of emotion was an open book. That night was the beginning of the end of my sanity. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched from the inside out. I tried to empty my mind, to think of nothing, but that in itself was a thought, and I imagined the voice being amused by my futile efforts. The silence was no longer a comfort. It was a terrifying, empty stage where my thoughts were the main performance. I started humming constantly, talking to myself out loud, filling the space with meaningless noise, hoping to drown out the silent broadcast of my mind. I'd recite recipes, list state capitals, sing nursery rhymes until my throat was raw. It was a desperate, frantic attempt to create static, to jam the signal, but I knew it was useless. The voice didn't need my ears, it heard the source. My own thoughts became my enemies. I was afraid to remember, afraid to plan, afraid to feel. I'd catch myself thinking about my family and immediately try to shove the thought away, terrified that this entity might learn about them, might somehow use that information. Living in that cabin became a form of psychological torture. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of paranoia through me. Was that a normal sound, or was it the entity, moving, watching? I started to see things in the corners of my eyes, flickering shadows, indistinct shapes that would vanish when I turned to look. I became suspicious of my own mind. Were these my thoughts, or were they being planted there? The voice hadn't spoken again since that night, but its presence was a constant, oppressive weight. The silence was a loaded gun pointed at my head. I couldn't trust my own memories of the accident anymore. Had I remembered it correctly, or had the voice, or my fear of it, warped the memory? The line between my own consciousness and this invasive presence blurred until I was unsure where I ended and it began. I felt like a puppet, and my own mind was pulling the strings, but someone else was watching the show, judging, listening. The solitude I had craved had become the ultimate prison, a panopticon with only one inmate, me. I had to get out. The realization came one morning after another sleepless night. The sun streamed through the window, but it brought no warmth, only a harsh light that exposed the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a potential spy. I couldn't live like this, in constant fear of my own mind. The sanctuary had become a trap. I threw my belongings into my bag with frantic energy, my hands shaking. I didn't bother to clean up or lock the door properly. I just needed to leave. As I fumbled with my car keys, my mind screamed, "I'm leaving. Are you happy now? I'm going." It was a defiant, desperate shout into the void of my own skull. I half expected an answer, a farewell from the voice, but there was only silence. The same heavy, knowing silence that had terrified me for weeks. It felt like it was letting me go, like a cat releasing a mouse it had grown tired of playing with. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the cabin in the rearview mirror. I was afraid of what I might see standing on the porch. I drove for hours, not stopping until I reached the first bustling town, the first place with traffic and streetlights and the beautiful, beautiful noise of other people. I checked into a cheap motel, turned the television on, and cranked the volume up as high as it would go. The meaningless chatter of a game show was the most comforting sound I had ever heard. It was a shield, a wall of noise to hide behind. But even here, surrounded by the clamor of civilization, the fear lingered. I left Montana, moved back to a crowded city, surrounding myself with as much noise as possible. I always have music playing, a podcast in my ears, the TV on in the background. I can't stand the quiet anymore. The silence is where the listeners are. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? They'd say I had a psychotic break from the isolation. They'd say it was all in my head. And that's the part that terrifies me the most. They're right. It was all in my head. But I wasn't the only one in there. I don't trust my thoughts anymore. I live my life on the surface, trying to think as little as possible. Because I know that no matter how loud the world gets, somewhere, in the deep, quiet corners of my own mind, something might still be listening. And it knows I'm louder than I realize. Thanks for watching. If you've ever had an experience you can't explain, let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories. Stay safe out there.